Hello, my name is Caleb and today we're going to be talking about the books that have left a lasting impression on my life. I think everybody has books where they read them for the first time and they know that book has done something to their life. I have a handful that I'm going to talk about today. I love all these books. I recommend all these books. Yeah, let's get into it. I think the first book we need to talk about is the most obvious. I'm pretty sure everybody has read this, and if you haven't read it, you need to go read it right now. Harry Potter. All the books in this series have changed my life so much. I read these back when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. This was really my first series that I ever read. Like, I had read books in the past growing up. This was the first one where it was a continuing series that went on and on. I really did grow up with these. They changed my life, obviously. They're one of my favorite books ever. It's one of the greatest stories on earth, and if you haven't read it, go! So yeah, I don't want to talk about this one for long because I think this is just a given at this point. The next book is another book that I read when I was a youngin', The Giver by Lois Lowry. I never talk about this on my channel, like it's never something that comes up. I haven't read it in like 2 or 3 years. I was in like 4th or 5th grade and this was one of my assigned readings and I was dreading it, and then I read it and it was amazing. I remember I flew through it, and this was actually one of the first books I enjoyed reading for school, and it definitely opened up my mind to classics because I used to think classics were so stupid. It was almost a gateway into a lot of other classics and being more open-minded to the idea of reading a book that's older. I do recommend, if you haven't read this book, it's so good. Go read it now. The next book is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This book made the list solely because this was my first fandom. I read Harry Potter when I was younger. I didn't have a phone. I wasn't on the internet at all. It was just kind of me loving it by myself. But then when The Hunger Games was happening, I was on the internet a lot more. So I had read the book and I got to watch the movie trailers come out and then see it in theaters and then read the whole series and then watch all those trailers come out. So I got to read the books, then see the adaptations happening and be like part of a fandom. That was my first fandom experience, and it's forever going in my mind as something that I'm never gonna forget. Like, I had never known how amazing a fandom could be, and then I finally was a part of one and it was amazing. I'm so sad that these movies and books are done, but I love them so much. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but it's really good. The next book is a book that I have to mention. City of Bones, or instead of just saying City of Bones, I think I should just say every Shadowhunter book ever, because that's the truth. This was another experience I had with fandom. This book was really my gateway into the booktube community. I remember I had read the book and I thought it was okay, but then there's a movie coming out and I was so excited, and then I searched City of Bones and saw a bunch of booktubers that I still watch today doing like trailer reactions and making book reviews for it. I remember thinking that it was so fun, like the idea of talking about books. Like, this was back in 2012, and so then I started watching booktube actively because of these books. Also, these books have really influenced my writing life. Cassie's humor in this book is very similar to my humor, and it was so funny and it was so fun and so good. You need to read these books. All the Shadowhunter books will forever go down as one of my favorite series ever. Cassie will always be one of my favorite authors. I just love it so much. You need to go read it. Okay, bye. The next book is a book that I've had a love-hate relationship more recently, but when looking back, this did play a major role in my reading life. Divergent by Veronica Roth. I'm not going to talk about all the current things that are going on with Veronica Roth, but back in the day, back in 2012, 2013, when I read this book, it was my favorite book of all time. This was the book I recommended to everybody. This was the book that I deemed as my favorite book for multiple years. Of course, since then, I've read a lot of different books and fallen in love with a lot of other stories, but this is still one of my favorites. I think I can say this, that this was the book that got me to my reading life today. I had read Harry Potter, I had read The Hunger Games, I loved those, but then I picked up Divergent. I don't even know how to describe it. It was something completely different than I'd ever read before. Because I read this book, people were like, oh, you should read Legend, and then I read Legend. Then people were like, oh, you should read Shatter Me, so then I read Shatter Me, and then people were like, oh, you should read Eleanor and Park. And then I read all these different books because of this book, and people recommended me different things because I liked this book. Even though I feel like more recently my love has died down, this will forever go down as my favorite book when I was in middle school. This book really was a rock during those years. So the next book is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This book was my first run-in with a contemporary book. All the other books I had read prior were like fantasy books, sci-fi books, dystopian books. I thought I was gonna hate this book. I deemed it as a girl book back in the day, and then I remember actually picking it up, and I just fell in love with the idea of these characters because they were real people in my mind, going through real things that real humans go through. It's still fiction, but it still felt like something that could happen in real life. My eyes really opened on the idea of reading stories like this. I used to think that reading contemporary books was just not my thing, but then I read this book and it really opened my eyes. So the next book I have is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I hardly talk about this book anymore, but I loved it so much. This really was the first book I read where I felt like I was exactly like the main character. I had read other books where I was like, oh, I'm very similar in this way, but Kath was me. Like, her anxiety was very similar to mine. Her awkwardness and her anxiety was very pinpointed like mine. Very subtle, but it's still there. I know how to deal with my anxiety. I know how to be like, okay, I'm anxious right now, let's not do that. But reading about her and seeing her story and seeing her journey was so amazing because I was so similar to her and I loved seeing how she grew. So the final book, I don't even know if I can call this a book because it's not really. Hamilton, that's it. It's Hamilton. I was trying to find a way to weasel Hamilton into here, but then I was like, oh look, this exists. I was really into Hamilton back when, like, you know what was happening last year with all the politics stuff. And seeing these characters talking about rising up. When you're living on your knees, you rise up. How at the beginning of the play, Hamilton was 19 years old and he made a change in our country. That was so important to me because I realized no matter how young I was, history has its eyes on me, and that was so important, and so I really got more immersed in the world around me. I love it so much, and it's so good, and you need to listen and you need to read. It's so good. I love it. So these are some of my most influential books in my life. Make sure to let me know in the comments what your most influential books are. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye!